In the most ordinary house, in the children's room, where there were picture books on the shelves and sometimes there were designer parts on the floor, there was one very important secret. If you squatted down and looked into the farthest corner behind the bookcase, you could see a tiny crack in the baseboard. It was there that the world of Nopa, the keeper of forgotten buttons. Nope's house was a real masterpiece of comfort, created from things that people considered missing. "So," Knop grumbled, adjusting his glasses, made of 2 droplets of congealed resin and a thin copper wire, "order in the house is order in thoughts." His living room was illuminated by a chandelier made from a lost stud earring with a bright rhinestone. When the moon was shining outside, the rhinestones caught its rays and scattered hundreds of small bunnies around the room. Instead of the usual table, Nop had a black chess piece, a rook, on top of which lay a perfectly round flat button from Dad's coat. It was the most durable table in the underground. The walls of the house were covered with bright candy wrappers, which Nop carefully smoothed with his palm. There was a golden lion on one wall and a fairy forest on the other. Nop's bed was an old soft mitt, in which he made a whole feather kingdom for himself. But the most important place in the house was the pantry. The walls were lined with shelves made of matchsticks. There were buttons on them, sorted by color and size. There were small mother-of-pearl polka dot buttons. Knop called them pearls. Large wooden buttons with 4 holes. They reminded him of the wheels of fabulous carriages. Golden buttons with coats of arms. These were the royal shields. Nop didn't just save up these things. He believed that every lost button has a soul. After all, a button is what holds clothes together, protects a person from wind and cold. When a button comes off and gets lost, she gets sad, and Nop's task was to warm it, clean it, and find a new use for it. That evening, Nop sat in his wine cork armchair and drank tea from the lid of a perfume bottle. The air smelled of dried mint and warm wood. Button listened. Footsteps died away in the large room upstairs. The lights went out, and the blessed silence came when small creatures can go out on a treasure hunt. That evening, Nop sat in his wine cork armchair and drank tea from the lid of a perfume bottle. The air smelled of dried mint and warm wood. Button listened. Footsteps died away in the large room upstairs. The lights went out, and the blessed silence came when small creatures can go out on a treasure hunt. Ah! When the big grandfather clock in the living room struck midnight, Button put down his cup and put on work boots made from a piece of old leather glove. He strapped his trusty tool to his belt, a thin fishing line with a tiny copper hook at the end. It was his lasso for fishing things out of deep crevices. "Well, Vorsinka, let's go check out how the world of giants will please us today," Button whispered to his faithful assistant, a pet spider who lived in the corner of the doorway. The spider just merrily moved its paws in response. Nop carefully got out from under the baseboard. For him, the carpet in the children's room was not just a carpet, but an endless fleecy field full of dangers and discoveries. Each lint was as tall as grass, and the slipper left on the floor looked like a huge sleeping whale that had to be carefully bypassed. The first find was found by Nop under the desk. It was a shiny paper clip bent in the shape of the letter S. Wow! Button adjusted his glasses. It's a great hanger for my hallway. Or if you bend it, you get a solid bridge over a puddle of spilled juice. He deftly hooked the paperclip with a fishing line and dragged it to his entrance, hiding it behind a cabinet leg. But the most interesting thing was waiting for him by the couch. There, in the deep shadows, something was dimly flickering. Button held his breath. He knew that sparkle. It was the button. It was dark blue, made of heavy glass, with a gold border around the edges. Such buttons usually decorate the most beautiful holiday dresses. The button was lying sideways, stuck between the leg of the sofa and the pile of carpet. She looked very sad and lonely. Nop came closer and lightly touched its surface with his palm. "Don't be afraid, little one," he murmured. "You're not a waif anymore. You're a treasure now." It wasn't easy to pull out such a heavy thing. Button planted his feet on the floor, tied a fishing line around the button, and began to pull, humming an old song by button makers. 1, 2, they've got it. Just a little more. With a soft click, the button gave way and slipped out of captivity. He was about to drag her home when suddenly his gaze fell on something strange. There was a teddy bear lying next to the wall. He looked sad. Instead of one eye, he had only broken strings sticking out. The button froze. He remembered a little girl crying in the afternoon because her beloved friend was blind. The dwarf looked at the blue button in his hands, then at the bear. A plan had formed in his mind that required incredible courage, but first it was necessary to prepare the instrument. Returning to his hiding place behind the baseboard, Nop did not immediately go to bed. On the contrary, real work began to boil in his small house. He laid out his night trophies on the rook table and lit an additional lamp, a tiny LED that had once fallen out of a greeting card and now served the dwarf well, powered by a small tablet battery. "Well, well, let's see what we have here," Button muttered, putting on his work apron made of a piece of eyeglass wipe. The first thing he did was take hold of the blue button. During the time spent under the sofa, it became covered with dust and lost its royal luster. Nop took out his pride, the polishing station. It was an ordinary old toothbrush with soft bristles. The dwarf squeezed a microscopic droplet of mint toothpaste onto it, which he got in the bathroom last week, and set to work. Sheesh, sheesh, it was heard in the silence of the underground. Button rubbed the button so hard that beads of sweat stood out on his forehead. Gradually, the layer of dust disappeared, and a deep blue glass, like the night sky, opened beneath it. The gold band shone so brightly that Nop had to close his eyes for a moment. "Beauty," he exhaled, admiring the result. Such a button would make a great shield for a knight, or even a ceremonial mirror for a noble lady from the world of elves. But Button remembered about the teddy bear, which was left lying on the carpet with its eye torn off. He applied a blue button to his imaginary drawing. It was almost the same size as the surviving bear cub's eye, only a little brighter. If I sew her back on, Mishka will be able to dream with the girl again, the dwarf reasoned. But I need a special thread for that. Nop went to his most secret drawer. There was a spool of golden silk stored there. In fact, it was an ordinary strong thread, but for Nop it was priceless because he found it in his grandmother's needlework box. And grandmothers, as you know a lot about real magic. The dwarf took out his needle, a thin steel pin that he had personally sharpened on a piece of sandpaper to the state of a razor. He inserted the gold thread into the ear, tested its strength, and carefully folded it into a travel bag. The work in the workshop was coming to an end. The tools were polished, the button was shining, and the rescue plan for Mishka was ready. The most difficult thing remained: to return to the big world and sew the button so that no one would notice the little master. The most dangerous moment of the night had arrived. Button slung a travel bag with gold thread on his back and clutched his trusty needle pin in his hand. To sew a button to a teddy bear, he had to get out into the open, where any shadow could look like a monster and a random draft could knock him down. "Well, let's get to it," he whispered to himself, getting out from under the cozy baseboard. The bear was lying in the same place where Nop had left it an hour ago, at the very foot of the crib. The girl's steady, calm snuffling could be heard from above. She had dreams, and he really hoped that in these dreams her beloved friend was already healthy. The dwarf climbed onto the bear's soft belly. For tiny Nop, it was like climbing a fluffy mountain. Mishka's paws smelled of baby soap and some cookies. When he got to the face of the toy, Button saw a sad sight. In place of the left eye, fragments of old black threads stuck out forlornly. "We're going to fix this now, buddy," Button winked at Mishka. He took out a shiny blue button from his bag. She covered the empty space perfectly. The dwarf deftly threaded the needle through the thick plush. It required tremendous force. Nop had to lean on the pin with all the weight of his tiny body to pierce the dense fabric. Once, the needle went down. 2, the golden thread is stretched. Nop worked quickly and accurately, like a real surgeon. He made exactly 12 stitches, the magic number for all underground craftsmen. He tightened each stitch with a soft grunt, making sure that the button sat firmly and evenly. The golden thread lay cross by cross, creating a beautiful pattern inside the blue glass, similar to the pupil of a strange beast. When the last knot was tied and hidden deep in the fur, Button cut off the extra thread with his small, sharp knife from a piece of razor. He took a step back to admire the work. The bear has transformed. His new eye, a deep blue with a golden sparkle, seemed alive. In the light of the moon shining through the curtains, the button flashed with a kind light. Now the little bear didn't look abandoned. He seemed like a wise dream keeper who had a magical artifact. Suddenly, the girl turned over in her sleep, and her hand hung off the bed, almost hitting the button. The dwarf rolled off the bear head over heels and froze, pressing himself against the pile of the carpet. His heart was pounding like a motor. He waited a few minutes until everything was quiet again and quickly ran to his hiding place. At the entrance behind the baseboard, he turned around. Mishka was lying on the floor, and his new eye was gleaming triumphantly in the dark. Button smiled. His most important button had found its home. When the first timid rays of the sun crept through the gap in the curtains and painted the carpet with golden stripes, Nop was already sitting at his small slit window. He didn't go to bed, even though his eyelids were desperately closing. He really wanted to see the finale of his night's work. A blanket rustled in a large room. The little girl woke up, stretched sweetly, and, as usual, first of all hung her legs off the bed in search of her slippers. But instead of slippers, her hand touched a soft, plush side. "Oh, teddy bear," she whispered, picking up the toy from the floor. Button held his breath. He saw how the girl froze, looking at her friend's face. Her fingers touched the new blue button that he had been sewing so diligently all night. In the morning light, the button shone like a real precious sapphire, and the gold stitches inside sparkled like a tiny star. "Mom, Mom, come here quickly!" The girl's clear voice echoed throughout the apartment. "Look, the bear has grown a magic eye. He's even more handsome than he was." Mom came in. She was surprised, twirling the bear in her hands, adjusting her glasses, and shaking her head. "What a strange and beautiful button," she was saying. "It probably got caught in the fur when you were playing hide and seek in the closet, and Grandma quietly sewed it on last night while you were sleeping." The girl hugged the bear to her and whispered in his ear, "No, Mommy, it was the night gnomes who brought him a present. Now he's having fabulous dreams and guarding me." Nop, hearing this, squeezed his eyes shut contentedly. His little heart was pounding with pride. It was the highest reward for the keeper of the forgotten buttons to know that the thing that was trash under the sofa had brought so much joy to someone. When the people went to the kitchen for breakfast and the room was quiet again, Nop finally allowed himself to relax. He took off his work boots, carefully placed them at the entrance, and went to his kitchen. He took out the most delicious crumbs of oatmeal cookies that he had saved since last Tuesday and brewed himself the last portion of flower tea. It was warm and cozy in his cabin. The earring chandelier flickered softly, reflecting the morning sun. "Well, Lint," he said to the spider, who had already begun to spin a new net in the corner, "we did a good job today. There is one less tear and one more smile in the world. This means that buttons do not exist in vain." Button climbed into his cozy mitt, covered himself with a piece of soft flannel, and closed his eyes. He dreamed of huge fields dotted with colorful buttons that rang like bells in the wind, and each of them knew that she was someone's little treasure.